take it.
And we're not going to stop it. Also not going to stop it. Headingley finishes it off.
Jack Bird with his first Leeds try.
There's just 5 games to go in the Betfred Super League season. We are counting down until those playoffs and semi-finals are confirmed. Well, the league still rolls on. It's round 23 of the Betfred Super League, and it's Leeds Rhinos off the back of such a huge win against Wakefield Trinity in that top of the table clash. What a night that was at the DIY Kitchen Stadium. They take on the Leigh Leopards, a side that have grown in confidence and are one of the informed sides in the league, are arriving here at AMT Headingley for another blockbuster clash. All these games down the running, set to be absolutely massive, and we are bringing you the preview, all the information, all the latest knowledge and expertise on each of the Rhinos opponents and the Rhinos camp themselves here on Matchday Live. I'm your host, Dan Hawkhead. A pleasure to have your company as we build up to this one on a little bit earlier because we've got our reserves in action here at 5:15. I'm joined though by BBC Radio Leeds' Jack Conlon. Jack, you were on the call for that game against Wakefield. Did you see that switch coming in the second half that it went from maybe some slight frustrations to utter just joy and wild celebration?
It was a crazy game to be commentating on, and it's one of those that you look back on with fondness, I think, in the future when it comes round to looking back at it, because yeah, just what a spectacle that was and what a game it was. It felt like a playoff game. With just how both sides played, how they approached it. Obviously, like you said, the swinging points, Wakefield getting that 16-point lead in the first half, that 10 minutes where they just blitz Leeds. It's probably the most rattled I've seen a Leeds Rhinos team this season in that period. You know, but full credit to the Rhinos. They get that try just before half time. There's clearly something said at the break to just, you know, keep them calm, keep them composed in the game. And yeah, you know, they concede again, don't they, early in the second half, and you think, right, that might just be a bridge too far. But you know, some fantastic work. The McDonald try first and foremost, which is almost Leeds' bread and butter, is that Scorecroft to McDonald on that short ball, and you know, he's got the power to go through. Cameron Smith's individual try, which in itself was just fantastic, a great bit of individual brilliance from him, and then obviously the final one, which was just desperation, pure desperation from Chris Hankinson to get on the end of that kick, and you know, seal a win. Leeds led in that game for less than 3 minutes. Wow! But it was the important last 3 minutes. So you know, it's a really positive result, I think, and you know, it's not Leeds' best performance this season by any stretch, but equally, you know, it's a good sign, I think, as a team that are pushing for the playoffs, that have got the high ambitions they do. When you look at what is coming after this next 4 or 5 rounds, that they can win games like that. Because, like I say, it felt like a playoff game, and if you're winning playoff games like that, that's the way to do it. You know, to be in the contest and just keep it as tight as it was all the way through, but ultimately come out on top. That is obviously the crucial bit, and you know, fair play to Leeds because they did manage to just about stay in it for long enough to then come out on the right side of that call.
I would argue we've not quite seen a performance like this from the Rhinos this year. We've seen sort of points where the side's dropped off, but there's been points to back us up. We really had our backs up against the wall, and like you said, against the Wakefield side, who, to their credit, was superb on the day. Just scoring for fun. They took advantage when Lockie Miller potentially went off the field and Alfie Edge had to do a little bit of moving around. They had that game in the bag. I think the bit of frustration maybe from Darryl Powell afterwards that his side didn't go on to win that game.
He couldn't believe it, really. There was a degree of disbelief, I think, about him when he came into the presser afterwards. I mean, from us on BBC Radio Leeds, as you know, 2 West Yorkshire sides at it like that. We spoke last week about, you know, I can't remember the last time there was a West Yorkshire derby that was as built up as that was, that had so much riding on it, that was first against second, you know, 2 sides in red hot form. as they both were. You know, and I'm so pleased that it lived up to its billing, because there were points where you thought it wouldn't do, particularly in Wakefield, take that lead, and you're like, right, is this the way that this is going to go now? But for Leeds to dig the heels in, you know, respond in that second half in the way they did, and eventually get themselves over the line with that late try, was just added to the spectacle, really. But, you know, I think, fair play to Wakefield. They're absolutely going to be up there come the playoffs. I think it's... I think that win now for Leeds, and I mean the Wigan game in a few weeks' time is obviously crucial.
Yes.
But I think Leeds have put themselves very much in pole position now for that League Leaders Shield. I think that's one team they've almost batted away. You know, I think that lead will end up becoming unassailable. You know, it's obviously still mathematically possible for Wakefield to jump back over Leeds, but I just don't see it happening in this last few rounds. So Wigan are the only real challengers there. So for me, that is at least 1 foot in that top 2 for the Rhinos. With 5 games left, as you say, we can't take anything for granted ultimately, and no one can in that top 6 or 7 of the table. But, you know, like I say, it's a really positive result for Leeds. You know, to win a game, yes, against a direct top 6, top 3, top 2 opponent, whatever you want to call them, but in that manner as well.
I think Rhinos fans will be really pleased to hear that. I've definitely been thinking that way and believing that way, that we're going to get a semi-final here. Couldn't tell you last time we did have one, probably 2017. You're looking against Hull FC, aren't we? But Wigan are going to remain in that conversation. They are absolute, and it's going to be another great game when we get to the start of September and they visit here at AMT Headingley. Focusing on today's opponents, Leigh Leopards, not to be underestimated. They have really bounced back. The comeback kings when I was looking at them this week, really. When you look at since they've come into the Super League, they've always had patches in a season where they've dropped off and then risen back up and made sure they're in that playoff conversation at least, and then get through to 2 semi-finals in 2024, 2025. We're seeing that again from Adrian Lamsard. Just how do they do it?
It's a great question, and I think if anyone knew, they'd know how to combat it as well.
Yes.
They are just you're absolutely right. They seem to get people knocking them down every year, and, you know, tipping them to finish outside the 6, saying, you know, they've lost too many players, or they don't like the same side. But then they managed to bring it back round again. Though this season they had a poor start, really poor start. You know, in that opening couple of months, but very much just come good, which is what we've sort of come to know from Leigh. And they're a side now that very much harbour those top 6 ambitions. Let's not forget, they're a side that going into this one are very much playing to put themselves ahead of that 7th spot where St Helens currently sit. You know,
do you think they're still at threat of that? Do you think
I think
a comeback from Saints could topple them?
Absolutely. I think it's still very much up for grabs between those 3 or 4 teams that are in and around that space. I do still think that St Helens, just given their injuries, given the form of a couple of the other sides in there, and given the run-ins, I think Saints will be the team that ends up on the wrong side of it and does end up in that 7th spot now. But I mean, you know, I could be completely proved wrong in the next few weeks, and, you know, that has happened before, so who knows? But I think Leigh are one of the stronger sides in and amongst that group. I could see them finishing 4th without a doubt, and coming through as the strongest of the other teams, if that makes sense. You know, I think that top 3 is almost locked in now, but I think Leigh could be the strongest of that other 4 chasing pack. So, and I say that just on the basis of the players they've now got back. You know, they've had periods this season where they've been really struggling for injuries. There's been times when they've had their entire back 5 out. You know, where they've had to reshuffle the middle unit as well. But you look at the side that they've got coming to this one, only a small handful of injuries. Frankie Holton's out, Bailey Hodgson's still out. There's a couple of others in there as well. You know, Keenan Brand's still out, Tessie New's still out, but there's still a good core group there. You know, they're nowhere near the injury level that they were earlier this season, and I think that's really benefited them as well. You know, they've been able to strike up those combinations, get used to playing with each other. We're going to come on to some of the key players that are in that squad as well. The spine in particular is where their threats really lie for me. So they're a team that still has a lot to play for, obviously, and will come into this game relishing the chance of pitting themselves against the side that have been the best team in Super League this year. You know, they will relish that challenge. Obviously come off the back of beating Leeds in the very first round of the season, which isn't a game I think you can read too much into, again, given the injuries the Rhinos had that day. But equally, Leigh will come here with that mindset, as they always do, of upsetting the apple cart, you know, and putting themselves in a better position in the league because, as mentioned, they are still chasing it.
I think it's almost two different games, isn't it? As such, when you think back to that round one game when the likes of George Brown, you had Riley Lund playing in that game, more likely now you're going to get potentially Ryan Hall. We'll come on to these changes, but two very different teams. Interestingly, Adrian Lamb saying a few weeks ago, he doesn't believe that he's had he's starting at 17 or not his dream 17 out on the field this year, and yet they're in the playoff conversation. It is absolutely remarkable work. When you look at what we say about a season of two halves, they only won 5 of the first 11 games. And in contrast, the last 11 games, they've won 9 of and lost 2. And really, there was a sort of a pinch point around round 8 against York, and have since just gone on this remarkable run where they're just toppling teams left, right and centre. They come into this game with, 5 straight wins before losing to Wigan and then picking up another win against York. Even without your likes of Tessie New, Keenan Brand, who scored 3 tries in this game last year, there's still threat, isn't there, in that Leigh side, regardless of who they've got out there.
Always is, and that is very much, I think, dictated by that spine. Lachlan Lamb being the real orchestrator, the one that drags them around the field. I think Armstrong and Cook, as they've come on this season again, Armstrong particularly, someone that struggled with injuries. I think we're starting to see the best from him. You know, they've worked out their roles in that squad and where they fit in too. But I think Leigh have just become a very tough side down the years, and I think some of the signings they've made as well, some of the recruitment that they've done has been pretty tip-top as well. One of their sort of shining lights this season has been Louis Brogan, a guy that they plucked from the Championship from Swinton.
It's remarkable, isn't it?
You know, who has grown into a player that they've really relied on this year, and that again is a product of some of those injuries. You know, he's got a chance, and now he's demanding a place in that 17. He started their last couple of games, I think, as part of that middle unit. So, yeah, you know, they're a smart side when it comes to the way they play rugby, but also the off-field stuff as well, i.e. that recruitment. You know, there's so many players that they've picked up from elsewhere. Inesini's been so good for them this season, hasn't he?
Really has.
You know, yes, he was good at Cass, but I don't think it was ever really appreciated how good he was at Cass or how much he was, you know, leaned on at Cass as a real try-scoring threat. Whereas, you know, Leigh have nabbed him off them and are running with that now. You know, you look throughout that team. There's players there that they've just sort of plucked from here, there, and everywhere.
Liam Horn, another one from Cass
Liam
too.
Horn again has been great this season for them. Really, really worked out a nice rotation with the Pape there for him. You know, there's examples all over the field that you can pick on and, you know, find how they've developed. Owen Trout, again, you know, won an England cap in the Ashes last season. Not been his best this year, but still he's a player that again they've sort of nurtured and brought through and, you know, created into this combative edge forward that can also play in the middle. There's players in there that they've just worked on, that they've backed and given a chance, and, you know, reaping the rewards through that.
Sometimes you get that confidence and you just absolutely fly with it. Owen Trout, of course, taking on his former side, Leeds Rhinos. He's in the 21-man squad. Just one change for Leigh coming into this one. AJ Taus, a welcome return potentially on the wing. He replaces Will Bruffjack. Do you potentially see AJ coming into the side, or with Andrew Badrock and Inesini, do you potentially see them just rolling with what's worked for them these last few weeks?
I don't see any changes, really. I think Jack Hughes could come into the side. He missed out last week, was named in the 21, is again this week, as you mentioned. But I think they are pretty settled, largely. Again, the only sort of shuffle I could see is against in the forward pack. If Adrian Lamb decides to do something a bit different, similar to how Brad Arthur has at times this year. It's not been the case so much in recent weeks, but at points this season, he's just rotated that front row unit. Sometimes Mikołaj Ledska's been on the bench, sometimes Jenkins has, sometimes Holroyd has. You know, he's sort of just moved them about a bit to give them both starting and bench opportunities as well. So that's the only thing I could maybe see Adrian Lamb doing. Isaac Liu started on the bench last week. He could come into the starting lineup potentially.
Huge inclusion if he does.
Absolutely. They've got Matt Davis as well as another option. You know, they've got players there that can just be rolled into that starting rotation. So that for me is the only area that they may change. Like I said, Jack Hughes, another option that it could put him. He's sort of become their utility now. Plays a bit in the middle, plays a bit as a back row, as we've always known him as. Plays in the centre as well. You know, he's someone that they can chuck in there as and when needed. Obviously, plenty of experience about him as well. So, yeah, I don't see a great deal of movement when it comes to that that Leigh lineup, particularly in the backs. I think they are settled, albeit, like you say, Badrock came in last week, did a very tidy job. He's a very tidy player. I think
he's got to try.
Yes, he did, exactly. So I don't see them moving that back line around too much at all.
Hughes, and interesting to bring up Hughes as well, because he makes his 100th Leigh appearance if he does run out today. A quick note for Gareth O'Brien as well. Congratulations to him. 350 career games. What a career he's had. Absolutely stellar and great. That should he get a run out, it'd be interesting to see if he does. Because that may maybe a move around at the back for Armstrong. I'm sticking with you, Jack. I think he maybe misses out today. Leeds, though, one change for those guys. We'll drop that team up below. Just Alfie Edgell dropping out and Ned McCormack coming in. But Ryan Hall seemingly seems to be back, judging what the club's been putting out this week. It seems like Ryan's going to be in from the start, so Ned, unfortunately, might miss out on this one. But a welcome return for a stalwart of the club and someone who knows down this stretch of the season just how important it can be and results can be.
Very much so, yeah. Real shame for Alfie Edgell. I think, on the back of that quad injury, which, fair play to him, he played a good half an hour with, by the sounds of things, against Wakefield last week. I thought it was really good. Switched into fullback for a period, obviously, when Lockie Miller went off with his HIA and his stitched up head.
Quite the stitch as well.
Yeah, I'm going to say I saw him wearing a scrum cap on some of the training pitches this week, so it's clearly made a mark. But yeah, I think he's really developed into a solid winger fullback this season when he has played. Again, had that week off a couple of weeks back against Toulouse with that hamstring strain or that tight hamstring he'd picked up. But came back in against Wakefield and did a really good job, I thought. Against Jaden Myers. So yeah, real shame for him that he's going to miss the rest of the season. But in Ryan Hall, you've got a more than adequate replacement. I'd imagine he comes back in on that left wing, played obviously right wing for most of this season. But for me, you keep Newman and Bird as that combination on the right and go with Handley and Hall on the left. I think that is just the natural change to make. Should he be fit enough, Ryan Hall? Obviously, your other options there are Riley Lum or Ned McCormack to come in. So, he's spoilt for choice a bit is Brad Arthur going into this one. But I think if everyone is fit, then Ryan Hall for me just seems like the most sensible choice. And otherwise, I don't see any other changes to that lineup. I think otherwise it'll be as they were from last week. Provided there's no late injuries or anything like that, it should just be that one change, and you'd imagine it will be Ryan Hall.
Always spoilt for choice, Brad Arthur. Whether it's like you said, his forwards, whether it's in his backs, he's just got a big pool of players to go from. A quick note as well for our milestone players this week. We've got Tom Holroyd making his 100th Leeds appearance and Mikolaj Ledsky making 200 Leeds appearances. Quick note on Mick. Obviously moving on to Perth for next year, but having a sensational year this year. What do you think about his development from being that big kid coming out of the academy? I remember him scoring the try against Cass at Magic Weekend and celebrating a bit prematurely with the fans, giving the scoreline that day. He's become such an integral part of this Leeds team, both as a player but as a personality. He's so brilliant to have around the club, and for 200 games today, a much needed reward.
Without a doubt, and yeah, like you say, I remember when he came through in 2016. I want to say I think his debut was
2017 against Doncaster in the Challenge Cup.
There we go. Yeah, fair enough. Nearly 10 years at the club. Came through very much at the same time as Cameron Smith. Was part of a really decent crop of development players, and yeah, I remember him coming through. Everyone seeing this massive kid that you thought, right, there's a player there, there's an athlete there, there's definitely promise. But some of those earlier days, I think the question around him was, and albeit this was obviously a relatively difficult-ish time for Leeds, it was very much the rebuilding phase, and he's been an integral part of that all the way through. But I think there were some points where, for such a big human, he maybe didn't warrant, or maybe the meters and the work that he got through didn't quite fit, from what you'd probably expect from someone of his sheer size. But that's really come on, I think, in the past few years. He's grown into his body. He's learnt how to be a dominant middle, a dominant front rower, and Leeds have been all the better for it. He's an absolute leader now in that pack. Yes. Jenkins in there as well now. Palacio when he's fit. Holroyd as well, who's been a real player this year.
Almost the same really kind of play when you think about them both coming through. Almost identical, Tom and Mick.
When you look at the size, without a doubt, and I think Holroyd will very much have to step into those shoes next season when Mikolaj goes to Perth. But he's been such a good servant down the years. Has always been just a solid core of the side. I think he's very rarely had any particularly bad injuries or real extended periods out of the team. He's always managed to keep himself fit, which again, as a middle unit who, puts his body through all sorts week in, week out. It's such a brutal position to play, especially the way that he does it. Fair play to him to have kept himself fit for as long as he has. So he will be a big miss at the end of the season. Maybe not the last time we'll see him in a Leeds jersey. I heard Brad Arthur, I think it was last week, maybe saying that when it comes to those players, I think it was Ian Blease, sorry, actually, on the club's podcast, saying that they always keep the relationship there, potentially keep the door open when it comes to players like that are going to Australia and going for those chances. So who knows? But he's certainly been a great servant to Leeds over the last 9+ years. Like I say, will be absolutely missed by them at the end of the year. But yeah, what a welcome reward for such a solid player and such an important player as well.
Just linking back to talk about last year's game here at AMT Headingley, a game that was all out attack, 48 points to 30. With that in mind, and I know that Brad Arthur tends to look forward rather than look what has been, do you maybe tend your squad this week, adding to also the result at Wakefield or the performance at Wakefield, do you change the team a little bit, knowing just how Leigh will come out and attack? And we will go through these threats in the side a little bit shortly. Do you tender the lineup judging to try to shut those down with knowing in mind that they can put points on the board like we saw last year?
I don't think he will. I really don't think he will.
He plays our game.
I genuinely think he will. He'll back what Leeds do. Obviously, they'll do their preview and they'll know what areas to target or what Leigh are going to throw at them. But I don't see a reason to differentiate from what they've been doing already, or to go away from that, because it has worked clearly. You look at a Wakefield side last week who are a different team to Leigh. I don't think they're as quick going forward as Leigh. They can become Wakefield, and their second phase is very good. But I don't think, in the way that Leigh put on structured moves and how slick they are at that, I don't think Wakefield do the same. But they handled Wakefield well enough. Yes, they were broken down on occasion. Without a doubt, again, I'll mention that 10-minute period in the first half, but largely they dealt with what they needed to. And I think it'll be the same approach again this week. We know what Leigh's threats are. Let's just go out there and nullify them in the best way we can. Those threats come from mainly 3 players, which are that spine, which we'll get onto very shortly.
Let's go straight onto it. Let's dig straight into it, because much like Wakefield last week, we tended to stick the key player segment down to 3 players. Yet again, we have picked out 5 for you, because that's just how impressive this Leigh side is. Let's get straight into those. So let's look at Lockie Lamb. Is a great starting point for it, in that it's now his 5th season at the club. Everyone knows what he can do with a ball in hand, whether he's off the ball, marshalling the troops around. He's where it all starts, isn't it? Every attack usually comes from the hand or the boot of Lachlan Lamb.
Very much so, and he's the pivotal part of that Leigh side. I can't stress that enough. When you look at a Leigh side, I think there's only been 2 or 3 times actually since he's been at the club where he's not played, and I'd have to double check and look at the record for that, but I don't know if they've won any of those games, or at the very least you can see just the difference when he doesn't play, because they just don't seem to tick as well without him in that outfit. Whatever it is he brings, everyone is just so used to Lachlan Lamb being there and knowing exactly what he brings and what he's going to do, and the fact that he's the orchestrator, he pulls the strings, he marshals the troops, he gets everyone where they should be, he kicks them around the field, he moves the ball from left to right, everything goes through him. Possibly like no other Super League player, actually, in the way that he's just the focal point, absolutely, for them, to a point where if you did take him out of that side, no one can really fill those shoes in the same way. They can try and change approach, but no one does the same thing, and that is a massive detriment to Leigh. So that just shows you how important Lachlan Lamb is, to that side. The guys that he's got either side of him this season as well, I think have been fantastic. Adam Cook, who will play on the right, David Armstrong at fullback, who will go on the left when they attack. That tends to be where they go. They're not locked into those sides, but that is generally where you see, Lamb will be that player that moves along the pitch. Armstrong will generally be the left side threat, Cook the right side threat. I think Cook and Lamb between them have got around 35 assists.
Yes, exactly that.
This season. So, that just shows just how pivotal they've been. I think Adam Cook has really grown into his role this season. Started slightly slower, but I think has got used to the pace of Super League and has very much matched it. And tailored his game to fit that. And Armstrong, we are finally seeing the best of him, I think. He came over here with a decent reputation, wasn't a big star in the NRL by any stretch, but was seen as a player that was about to break onto the scene over there. Hence why it was such a big coup for Leigh to bring him over. Has his injury issues last season. I think was it hamstring or knee perhaps?
I think it was. I think it said it was 4 parts of his knee. It was ironically in this game against Leeds last year that they had to pull him at half time because there was just his knee had basically collapsed.
Exactly.
Remarkable that he's come back from that.
Well, it was for such a play like that, and one that again sort of fits into a mould to a degree of fullbacks that we've seen be successful in Super League, Lockie Miller, Jay Field, etc. That sort of explosive fullback that just has that lightning pace. He's a bit taller and a bit slimmer than those two. Perhaps he's a different body type, but still offers that threat. And the fact that we are now seeing him fully fit, fully able to trust his body as well, to get into those positions and properly play the way that he wants to and play to his strengths as well. It's great for Super League. It's a danger for clubs that they come up against because he just offers such a different point of attack down that left edge, wherever he manages to pop himself up. So, I think those two supporting spine members alongside Lamb have really, really helped Leigh this year in where they find themselves now. They've been so crucial to everything that they've done right. So for me, it is those three that you want to watch and that you want to keep an eye on and that are going to be the biggest threats for Leeds. That's not to say that there's not other contributors to that, and we'll come on to a couple of those, but for me, those three are the ones that you watch, particularly when they're in good ball. Lamb for just about anywhere in the field, just for the way that he will dictate an attacking set, the way that he'll kick into corners. Those three are the ones you need to watch and attack.
There you go. You've heard it here first. The number 1, the number 6, and the number 7 are the numbers you need to be watching on the Leigh backs today. I think, more backs up your point about recruitment. Armstrong came across last year, Cook's come across this year and just really developed. Cook in particular, I think there's a bit more emphasis, isn't there, as a halfback? You come in and if you're almost not going as soon as the season kicks off, there's at least a few eyes on you that you're not living up to when you've got someone as experienced as Gareth O'Brien in the back of or just waiting for his opportunity. To his credit though, Cook, he's really turned it on. Is it the game situations that he's now feel like he's understood? Do you just think he's got along better with Lockie Lamb compared to the start of the year?
I think it's the pace of the league, in fairness, and I think if you ever hear from some of the Australian players that come over here to play, one thing that they will always point out is just getting used to that difference. The NRL is very structure driven, both in attack and defence. Over here there's a bit more leniency with it. Yes, they've still got systems on both sides of the ball of just about every club, but equally I think there's a lot more scope for that off-the-cuff rugby and for that pacier rugby. I think that's been heightened this year as well with the changes to the rules around the rucks.
Yes.
That has been a massive difference. So I think for a player like him that does have the natural pace that he does, playing in that 6 role as well, I think it did just take him a while to get up to speed and get properly used to the way that Super League is in comparison to playing in the New South Wales Cup that he would have done primarily in Australia with those handful of NRL games sprinkled in that he had. So for me, I think that's what it is. It was just getting up to pace or up to speed with Super League and what it's like over here. And now that he's found that and he's got used to it, he's found the way that he can fit himself into that structure and into the pace of a game, it's all the better for it. And that is why he's suddenly, sort of from mid-season onwards, just had this uptick.
And he loves a 40-20 as well, so watch out for him with the kicking boot. You talk about people who have, I think, add to or do the little bit of fancy things alongside the work of these three. Josh Charnley's one of those that you would say, or you've said, not even arguably, he has converted those chances. 23 Super League tries this year, 25 in all competitions. He'd have been our head-to-head if Mike Sevo was fit this week. Let's put it that way, everybody. He is still at his age to be doing what he's doing. And I get there's an argument of, you look at Michalewski, they put themselves through so much more in the middle. But for Josh Charnley to be maintaining his standards, almost like a Ryan Hall as well, to be finishing the tries he does, to be putting himself in the position to score he does, is an absolute testament to just the athlete he is, isn't he?
Absolutely, and those two are more than likely going to come head-to-head this week, actually. Ryan Hall and Josh Charnley, the former holder of Super League's all-time leading try scorer against the current one that overtook him this year, of course.
And now moved clear.
Yes. But you're absolutely right. He had a couple of years off in rugby union, didn't he, Josh Charnley? But still managed to, like you say, maintain those high standards. Let's not forget as well, he's had periods where he's been an almost unwanted player. You remember how his time finished at Warrington, of course, where he was sort of just nudged out. There was a period at Leigh where he was nearly in that, position as well, like last season before, whenever it was. But you know, he's absolutely just always broken down that barrier and smashed back through, and it's almost just giving him that extra fire in the belly to come back better. And you know, like you say, 23 Super League tries this year, I think. You know, he's still hitting those heights, even you know, as sort of an early into mid 30s winger now. You know, he's still maintaining that. He's again a player that's had to sort of change the way that he approaches the game at times. I think his game used to be very much based on speed and pace, whereas now it's a lot more on sort of power and positioning, I think, and knowing how to finish a try. And that again comes with that experience. You know, you give him the ball inside the 10. You know, we look at Mike Acevo's approach to try scoring from those sorts of positions where it's just power straight forward.
Bulldozer, I think, isn't he?
Charnley's got a much more, I think, forensic way of going about those moments, those positions, in that, you know, he very much reads what a defender's going to do, so tries to combat that and moves his body inside, or he knows whether to take a player on the outside or the inside. You know, he's built up a really good bit of game smarts as a winger down the years, and again, I think that's partly what was attributed to him being still such a natural try scorer, such a great finisher, such a great all-round player.
He's fantastic, and I'm really interested to see that battle tonight against Ryan Hall. Two absolute veterans, two England internationals going absolute head-to-head. Moving into the pack for Leigh themselves, very few players have had the impact I think that Joe Offahengawi has had. York coach Mark Applegarth said after the game last week, he thinks that he is one of the best players in Super League currently, and I get that that's an opposition coach saying that about you, but he just brings something that I don't think any other forward in the league. But he's very much, I think the closest would be Keenan Palacia.
Probably.
His post-contact meters, his offload game are really where he strikes himself. Have you been impressed by him this year?
Without a doubt.
In a full season as well, bear in mind he was half a year last year.
I think even the chunk of time he played over here last year was excellent. You know, he added so much to that League pack, and he's just continued that and built on it really into 2026. Like you say, his offloading game very much speaks for itself. I think he's on 30 odd offloads, 30 plus offloads, something like that. So yeah, you know, he's just got that knack of you know, finding a way to wrestle out of a tackle and get an arm free. I mean, I still think the best offloader ever in Super League history was Adam Cuthbertson, without a doubt. You know, when he was here, you do well. I think any defender would do well to keep a hold and put him to ground. You know, he didn't seem to like playing the ball, so he was like, right, I'll get rid of this before I can do so. You know, he was just a ridiculous player. Offahengawi is not quite the same. You know, I think he's got a bit more grunt to his game, and will just, you know, still do those hard yards. Like you say, his post-contact meters are equally just as impressive. You know, he does a lot of that side of the game, but equally, he's very good at setting Leigh off on the second phase and finding a Cook or a Lamb or an Armstrong to really put them on that front foot. And again, as a leader of that pack, which I think when you look at who Leigh have got, there's a fair few of those. Rob Mulhern, Isaac Liu, you know, he's one of those co-captains alongside Lamb. You know, there's players that you'd expect to really take the team by the scruff of the neck when it comes to the middles and drive them forward, but Offahengawi has very much taken that role on this year. Again, he's one of those, I think, has been one of the more consistent when it comes to minutes and game time this season. They've had a fair few injuries in the pack. I don't think Offahengawi's missed too many games. I might have to look, but you know, that always naturally helps with the player. So yeah, he's been outstanding for them, and you know, he's one of those that I mentioned earlier that, yes, I still think the three that you look at as the danger men are that spine, but they can't do what they do without having an Offahengawi leading that pack and driving them forward. So I think coming up against Oledsky and Jenkins and Holroyd, I think that's a really, really interesting battle. Oledsky in particular, you know, you'd imagine those two will try and knock 7 bells out of each other, so that'll be entertaining in itself as viewing. So, but yeah, he's a fantastic player for them. Two really interesting packs head-to-head this week, and I think we've mentioned quite a bit about the two that will lead them in Oledsky and in Offahengawi.
Hamlin ULA for Tilly last week, Offahengawi and Mulhern this week. As such as well, like I've also said that, you know, he's got the Queensland and the extensive NRL experience. Him and Liu really do add the star names. When you look at a pack actually for Leigh, that is not made up of massive names. You've said, you know, Frankie Holton's missing this week, but Owen Trout's only really come through in the last few years as being one of the premier in his position. Mulhern, always been consistent and off to Casper next year, but not a massive name. They're one of those that we said it earlier, we're talking about the back line, they give those players that are maybe on the fringe of other teams a bit of confidence and they look like superstars.
Without a doubt, and it's that confidence they instill in them that seems to bring out the best in them, giving them that chance, giving them that responsibility. I think that's often overlooked as, how big a factor it can be in a player's development, is giving them responsibility, and telling them to take something on the shoulders. And I'm not a coach myself, I wouldn't know, there will be players that respond better to different approaches, but I think certainly with Leigh, from an outsider looking in, you'd imagine that a fair degree of that's seen Rob Mulhern come on in the way that he has. Obviously started at that period at Hull KR where he looked good, but has really come into his own since he's gone to Leigh. Owen Trout is another one. Frankie Holton, without a doubt. Louis Brogan that we mentioned earlier. I'd imagine that part of that is Adrian Lamb giving them that task and saying, this is on your shoulders. If we're going to be good today, part of that is on you. And this is your role, and this is what I need you to do. And it's instructing them and giving them that confidence, but also that responsibility to go out there and deliver and do the job to the high standard. And I think that is the sign probably of a good coach in Adrian Lamb, is the fact that he's been able to bring on so many of these players and take them from one level to the next. And we've seen it constantly, I think, through Leigh's evolution as a Super League side in recent years, that they've constantly picked up players and made them better. And Myla Hanley is another great example, who I know we're going to come on to next, but you could pick a fair few players out of that Leigh team and say, they were not so much down and out, but they weren't going to amount to anything near what they ended up amounting to in that Leigh side, but have been given that confidence and that trust and have flourished with it.
And I don't think it goes unnoticed, just Adrian Lamb's impact on this side. Great that you mentioned Myla Hanley. We will get straight on to our key players, and we have moved into the back line, moving to the centres. It's Myla Hanley up against Ash Handley. Going to have to make sure that we say which one we mean here, Jack. But both of them in the England conversation, much certainly we were talking through what our backline potential looks like for Brian McDermott's side later in the year. Ash Handley, very much in that conversation. A pleasure to have him back out, just for his leadership, but the way he carts that ball forward last time out against Wakefield. Back on home soil, though, he will be an absolutely different animal. What do you expect him to do up against either, whether it be a Charnley or Hanley on this occasion, whether it potentially means going over to the other side? How do you see him just coming up against this more Leigh as a defensive line? I
think it'll be almost the immovable object against the unstoppable force when it comes to Handley against Hanley, because they are just both such front-footed centres. And pride themselves on their defence as well. So it's so hard to say who would get the better of the other in a game like this. I think you'd back Ash Handley, given his experience, his leadership now, the fact that he has just been one of Super League's best centres, if not the best centre this season. When he's on top, he's been so good. His footwork and his wherewithal in that small amount of space that he gets in that left centre channel has been so good, and it's contributed to so many, not just tries for Leeds, but good attacking movements as well, where they've created opportunities further down the line and just put themselves in good field position. He's been so good for that, this year. I mean, he's I think on 13 odd assists now, so he's himself is finding those opportunities to put in players on the wing. Most of those Mike Acevo, by the way,
of course,
which comes to no surprise to anyone. But equally, Myla Hanley, again, a player who is a bit greener than Ash Handley would be. Came through the Wigan Academy, of course. Went to Leigh as more of a sort of alternative full-back winger option. Got his chance sort of last year before, and again, he's just a player that's really grown into that role, that right centre spot. He's just made it his own, and backed himself again. Someone that combines that pace and power, that footwork that he's got as well. Again, doing a lot of work in a really small area of space down that right channel. So I think they are quite similar players, really, on the face of it, when you look at how they both play and how they go about their business. Hence why I use that analogy of the unstoppable force against the immovable object, because I genuinely do think that is what this looks like when it comes down to it. So yeah, for me, that again is just such an interesting battle, down that edge, and we'll see who comes out on top.
I'm hesitant to pick up the stats for this, only because Myla Hanley obviously missed a bulk of the season with a shoulder injury suffered in pre-season, so his stats look a little bit behind where Ash is, because he's obviously had a few more minutes. Granted, he's missed a handful of games, not as many as Handley. Do you think actually, though, the way that Myla Hanley has been able to work with Josh Charnley, and that's almost been a go-to side for Leigh when they're desperate for points, they'll get, like you said about earlier, Adam Cook will be there, Lockie Lamb chimes in, and then it's one of those two guys, and it's tended to be one of those two guys that found the try line. That's could be something we see replicated out here today.
Very possibly. I think they're coming up against Ash Handley and more than likely Ryan Hall, which in itself is, again, a pretty mouth-watering, sort of head-to-head when you look at those two sets of players opposite each other. I think that is a really interesting battle. You've got the two veterans on the wing. Handley's sort of teetering on veteran, isn't he, I guess, with how long he's been at the Rhinos, but, slightly younger players inside them that are in excellent form at the minute will both see themselves in that England conversation. Now, it's a really competitive area, is the centres for England. Yes. Herbie Farnworth picks himself almost. Jake Wardle's been in that conversation. Billy Smith, who is yet to make an England appearance, yet to get a cap, but has put himself in the fold, been really good for the Sydney Roosters. Obviously one of the heritage players as well that's in there. Handley, I don't think you can discount whatsoever because of how good he's been. Again, arguably the best centre in Super League this season. And Amila Handley is sort of your outside bet there for me. Just because of how consistent he's been, offers that extra bit of utility value as well, like Handley does. So that they're both players that would absolutely see themselves being in that conversation, and why not? Because of how they've done the last couple of years. But it's if you sort of pinning that conversation on the England spots, that's so hard to call straight away.
We're not calling that after his shows. We're not calling these.
That's maybe for a conversation. That's maybe a conversation for further down the line. But I think based on this game, Handley on paper is probably the one that you'd say is in the better form and would be in the better fit for an England spot. But will that then motivate Amila Handley to be like, no, I'm going to get one over on you, and I'm going to go one better and show that if it's going to be between us two, if we're both in that conversation, then I'm going to be the one that comes out on top. So I think there's all sorts you could frame it around that head-to-head and that direct competition, but I think it's one area again, and there's so many little sort of pockets in this game where you could look at opposite numbers and see who, and pit them against each other and really struggle to call, certainly before the game, who comes out on top. And I think that's a really, really big one, is that little channel where you've got Handley against Handley with Hall against Charnley outside them.
I think it's a really great point to bring up, because not only were we looking at potentially Mike Seaver before he got injured, but I think you've talked about Adam Cook, and fans will be able to see the similarities between his game and Jake Connor, even though granted, Cook's a 6 and Connor plays 7 usually. We've talked about the 4-pack. We've not even gotten to the hookers, which, granted, if Danny Levi was out there, it'd be a bit more of a closer comparison with Edwin Apape than what Jared O'Connor is, but that's still a big area. There are battles all over the field. Now, Leigh come back, this is one of only 2 away games for Leigh down the last stretch. They play 3 at home. How big do you think getting a result today, coupled with granted that they play better when they play in front of a home crowd? Yes, they've got a tougher set, particularly their last 2 games that were St Helens and Wakefield down the last stretch. But if they get a win today, does that really set them up for trying to get above Hull KR, Warrington, that are just within reach?
Without a doubt it does. It's those crucial 2 competition points, which when we're in this stage of the season and games are few and far between, it's ticking down towards the playoffs. Every point is vital. So yes, absolutely, you can look at it that way, but equally, it's just as important for Leeds when it comes to what they want, which is getting the League Leader Shield. Again, a win would just put pressure on Wigan and Wakefield to keep chasing them. As we've mentioned, Leeds play Wigan down the line, which again is looking like a blockbuster game the closer we get to it. So I think it's 2 teams that have got a lot to play for, and this is without even mentioning the fact that they will both have in their minds that they are teeing themselves up or starting to gear up and build into a possible playoff campaign. That at this point in the season, again, I think starts to play into teams' minds that, we need to start thinking about when we're going to peak and peaking at the right time, not sort of getting into it too early and then dipping off when we get into that stage of the season. So I think there's so much on this game for both sides. Again, the fact they're both in that top 6 mix does make it all the more interesting. And I think of the games that are going on this Thursday, of which there are 3, this is your pick. This is your one that really sort of gets you thinking and is a mouth-watering game. So, I think it'll be a really, really interesting clash, this one.
The Betfred Super League is hotting up just as it is here at AMT Headingley. It is absolutely roasting, so we cannot wait to see you down here. Whether you're coming down for the main game, which is obviously kick-off at 8 o'clock, or you're coming down to support the reserves up against Hull FC, you could join myself and Ben Smith on the other side of this. We'll be taking you through all the action on Rhinos TV+. If you've not subscribed, $5.99, get yourself on that. If you're coming down to the stadium, though, enjoy the game. For the main Super League game, though, if you're out and about, the best way to watch the action, if you're not here at AMT Headingley, is on Sky Sports. We're on the main event this week. That's how big this game is. Jack's just said it's one of the big ties of the round. We're on the main event channel for this one. And of course, our great friends at BBC Radio Leeds, Jack, bringing you full match commentary. If you're out travelling, if you can't quite get yourself in front of a TV, you can listen to the full match live with yourself, can't we, Jack?
Absolutely, yeah. We're an online stream this week, so you can find us on the BBC Sport website, an app worldwide, wherever you go. Like you say, take us with you. We'll be on BBC Sport. Myself and Francis Cummins, your commentary team this week.
And of course, Francis Cummins, head coach of the Hull FC Reserve. So if you're wanting to watch that, Rhinos TV Plus, $5.99, that's coming up next. Well, my thanks to Jack Conlon for his expert insight and analysis, as always. I've been Dan Hawkhead. If you're coming down for the main Super League game, we will see you very shortly. And if not, if you're joining us on Rhinos TV Plus, we will see you on the other side. Enjoy the game, everybody, and see you all soon.